What are the most difficult things about learning Spanish? What can you learn from the way Reza and I overcame the challenges of learning a second language? We hope our experience can help you improve your English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hello and welcome. My name's Craig.
And my name is Reza.
And together with nearly 50 years of teaching English between us, Reza and I are going to help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. How are you, mate?
Muy bien, gracias. ¿Y tú?
Muy bien.
You see, we're expert Spanish speakers, nearly. Well,
yeah,
quite.
that's more or less the limit of my Spanish.
No, that's not true, as you will see. That is not true.
We've been speaking Spanish for quite a few years, and we hope that our experience can help you improve your English. But before we start speaking about that, we'd like to thank Alberto for your kind Christmas gift, Alberto. It was wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
Yes, thanks very much, Alberto. I'm really looking forward to trying it. I haven't tried yet because it's such really, really nice stuff that I'm saving it for a special occasion. So thanks so much for that, Alberto.
Yeah, thanks, mate. We have an audio message from Marina from Asturias.
Hello, Reza. Hello, Craig. It's Marina from Asturias in Spain. I've recently discovered your podcast and I've been loving it so far. You are helping me to improve my listening and widen my vocabulary. At the same time, I learn new things about several topics. Besides, I've been always curious about one question. What are the most difficult things for English people to learn about the Spanish language? It would be great if you could make an episode about it. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Marina, for your wonderful message. Excellent pronunciation. We loved your message and expressions like to widen your vocabulary. Very, very, very good. Any comments, Reza?
Thanks very much, Marina, and I envy you up there in Asturias. It's a beautiful part of the world. I haven't been there in a while, but many years ago I was in Gijón, Oviedo, also Cangas de Onís, and what's that place called? Llanes. Lovely places. Have you ever been to Asturias?
The same as you. I haven't been for many, many, many years. It's been too long. I need to go and visit again, but it's a beautiful part of Spain. It's very green. The food is absolutely excellent. The people are lovely. So I think it's time I revisited Asturias.
As for your message, as Craig said, lovely pronunciation, all correct. Although there was one tiny little thing that we could change. I wouldn't even say it's a mistake, but you said, I've been always curious. That's not exactly wrong, but it's more typical to put an adverb of frequency like always, sometimes, never, before the verb to be. So it would sound better to say, I've always been curious. Right? Your wish is our command, as the genie from the bottle said, Marina. We're going to talk about exactly that. What are the most difficult things for English people, or English speakers, I would prefer to say, as I'm not an English person, to learn about the Spanish language? I'm happy to be called a British person, but technically I'm not English, nor are my British compatriots from Scotland or Wales, but English speakers, yes.
So we've both been immersed in the Spanish language for many years, and we do have quite a good perspective on the difficulties of Spanish. So one thing personally for me, and I suspect for other learners of Spanish would find difficult, verb tenses. There are many different verb tenses in Spanish, and the endings and the groups of the verbs are a constant confusion for me. Is that something that you struggle with?
Yes, and I suppose that nearly all English speakers find that difficult, because in English we simply don't have that complexity of all the different conjugations of the verb, you know, the yo como, tú comes, él come, the different conjugations of the different people, every person different for every verb. We don't have that complexity. So, of course, we find that difficult.
In fact, it bothered me, it disturbed me so much. About 2.5 years ago, I went to AIRC295, who are sponsoring us again, I'm happy to say, and I got a Spanish teacher from Buenos Aires, a lovely lady called Alicia, to help me with my past tenses. And welcome back, AIRC295. It's lovely to have you sponsoring us again. Let's tell the listeners about AIRC295, because maybe AIRC295 can help you in the same way that it helped me. What I did was I found a teacher on AIRC295, and when we connected on Skype, I said, listen, Alicia, I've got problems with my past tenses in Spanish. I want to focus specifically on improving my past tenses. And that's what we did. She prepared some lessons for me. She gave me some exercises to do for homework. And the following week, I connected again with her and we had a conversation speaking about the past and improving my past tenses. So what AIRC295 can do for you is focus specifically with a private teacher on problems you're having with your English. And that's very powerful because, as Reza knows, when you go into a class, it's usually the teacher who's choosing the vocabulary area, the grammar topic. And when you know your weaknesses in English, you can tell the teacher, this is what I want to focus on. So you get very personal one-to-one tuition and classes. Reza, if people want to sign up with AIRC295 and pay for a couple of lessons to try it out, to test it, is there anything we can help them with?
Yes. Just have a look at the show notes for this episode, which is episode 295, and you'll see a link there to information about AIRC295. Click on that link, and that will bring you to the relevant place. And you'll see there how you can get $10 in AIRC295 credit to make your first purchase. So if you register, AIRC295 will give you the equivalent of $10 to get you started with your first lesson.
We're very happy to welcome AIRC295 back, and thank you for sponsoring our podcast.
So, as Craig was saying, verbs in general have caused him and me a lot of problems. But Craig, there's two classic verbs which we guiris or gringos often confuse. What are those two verbs?
Oh, it's a nightmare. Ser and estar. When do you use ser? When do you use estar? Sometimes it feels like a lottery. I just don't know. I've heard that ser is for when things are of a more permanent state, and estar when things are more temporary. But still, there are exceptions, and I'm often confused.
Yeah, big exceptions, like, isn't it? A place is estar. So Madrid está en el centro de España. Mm-hmm. But hold on, that's permanent. Madrid isn't going anywhere. So that's a big exception to the rule. Can you think of any other exceptions to ser or estar?
I can't at the moment, and that's why it's so confusing for me, because if you have to think every time you're going to use what is the verb to be in Spanish, my brain doesn't work fast enough to think, hang on, is this permanent? Is it temporary? Is it an exception? Yeah. And it's difficult for us.
I know when you ask somebody how they're feeling about their mood, not their character, but their mood. ¿Cómo estás? How are you? So I answer, estoy feliz, estoy bien, whatever estoy. Yeah, because that's my mood. It's how I'm feeling now. But when I say, do you know anything about John? I haven't seen John in a while. And somebody might say, oh, haven't you heard the bad news? Está muerto. He's dead. But hold on, está muerto? That's not temporary. You're not going to come back to life.
Maybe it's a zombie.
Yeah, strange, but in Spanish, yeah, estar for dead, which is not going to change, is it? Or estoy vivo. Well, that could change, I suppose. Estoy vivo, that makes sense because you could die, yeah? But estoy muerto doesn't make sense to me because you're not coming back to life, but they're both estar.
And if you say to a girl, estás muy guapa, does that mean like usually she's ugly?
Yeah, you're avoiding the question. You're saying, for now, you look great.
Yeah, normally you look terrible, but now you look great.
Yeah. No, I think the reason why people do that, I've actually thought about that because that used to cause me a lot of problems. If you say eres guapa, it sounds like you've been kind of observing them. It's like
For a long time.
You're permanently good looking. It's a way of saying, hey, I fancy you.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's okay. It's safe enough to say, estás guapa. It's like, oh, you look nice today, in English. But if you say to somebody, you're beautiful kind of thing in English, that's like, eres guapa. It's like, I've noticed you, and you are a beautiful person. Like, whoa, it's like you're chatting someone up, ligando. Be careful if you use ser and guapa.
But you're a beautiful person could be her personality.
Mm-hmm. Could be that.
Yeah.
But just be careful with that. There's one more complication to that. I think I'm right now. Ser buena y estar buena, or even bueno. Una chica, una mujer, una tía está buena. It doesn't mean temporary, even though you've said estar. Like, she's good looking. It's kind of colloquial English, like she's a good looking woman. Está buena. Not es buena. It's always está buena. If you say ella es buena, it's like she's a good person. So the same word buena is ser estar changes the meaning. Es buena, she's a good person. Está buena, she's a good looking woman.
She's attractive.
Yep.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If I do something good for my partner, for my wife, she says, ay, qué bueno eres.
Yeah.
Does that mean just at that moment, or does that mean I'm a good person in general?
It's a bit ambiguous. It's a bit ambiguous. But I'm afraid to say she's not commenting on your look, so she's not saying you're good looking.
Yeah, well, we know that.
She's just saying you're being good to her.
Another sticking point. A sticking point is something that causes problems. It says to stick is pegar, so it's a sticking point. Is the subjunctive. That's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. If verbs in general weren't bad enough, the Spanish language has to be obsessed with these subjunctives to make our lives even more difficult.
Because we don't really have the subjunctive in English, not these days.
Well, technically we do, but we don't think about it.
We don't use it. We don't really...
I think technically it is the subjunctive if you want to be pedantic. In a second conditional, for example, like, when you say, if I were you,
yes,
I would study more. That if I were instead of if I was is the normal. So technically, I think that's subjunctive, but we don't think of it like that. It's just, it's the verb to be, but instead of was, say were. It's no big deal.
But it's a lot more obvious, a lot more common and used in Spanish, and that causes us problems.
I never remember the rules for that one. Doesn't it depend if it's a thought or a hope or desire or something like that, but not reality, subjunctive, but there are some exceptions, and it's complicated.
And after certain words like cuando and para qué and
quizás llegue tarde, not quizás llegando. All sorts of things. Complicated language, Spanish.
And moving on to pronunciation, of course, there are some things that it's difficult for English speakers to get their tongues around. Now, recently we had an episode on tongue twisters, and this really does twist my tongue when you have double R in a word, two R's together, and the expression in English is to roll your R's, R-O-L-L. For example, in words like perro, dog.
Or carro, which could be car or could be an old-fashioned carriage with horses, or cart, a little bit smaller than a carriage. A carriage is like covered, posh, and a cart is just a simple open vehicle with a horse. Or it could be a shopping trolley like you get from the supermarket. All of those are carro.
Other words that have the double R, which are difficult for me, let's see how I can pronounce them. Correr. No, that was bad.
No,
correr.
It was good.
Torre, tower. Ocurrir. Oh, no.
That's a really hard one.
You do it.
Well, I'll try. Let me think. Ocurrir.
Very good, Reza.
I find that really hard because you got the double R and then the single R after that. Oh, it's tricky. Ocurrir.
And the two vowels as well. Ocurrir. Is that okay?
Yep, that was really good.
And to save money. How do you say to save money?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Ahorrar. That's very difficult, isn't it?
And also in the past, which is one of my problems, is to choose the right past ending. Yo ahorré. I saved. I saved money. Yo ahorré.
And how would you say he saved?
Él ahorró.
Not so good, that one.
Not so good, that one, no.
El ahorro.
Wow.
Ahorro. I'm exaggerating a bit, but if I exaggerate, it helps me do it. If I
Yeah.
say it like a normal Spanish person, it doesn't work. I've got to really exaggerate.
Yeah, but when I exaggerate it, it sounds weird. It sounds strange. One difficulty I had, and I think it's a personal thing just for Craig, was the difference between fear and caca, or shit. The difference between miedo and mierda. Because I used to say things like, I had shit, tenía mierdo. And I used to confuse the two. I was shit. So that was a very big problem for me. I think now I'm okay because I had enough embarrassing situations with Spanish speakers to actually realize, look, I don't want to keep embarrassing myself. I need to know and learn the difference between miedo and mierda. So I think now I know.
I'm just trying to imagine all the problems you got in. Like when some Spanish person asked you, were you afraid of some situation?
I was full of shit.
Yeah. You wanted to say, daba miedo, but daba mierda. It's like,
Exactly.
What, so scared that you ruined your trousers? Oh, dear.
What other difficulties are there for us?
When you put double R with double L, that's always hard.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh. So, Craig, have a go at the word developing.
Now, this is a word that I need to use a lot because I have worked a lot with software and projects. So when you're developing software or developing a course or developing a project, in Spanish you have to say desarrollado.
You said ado, that would be developed.
Okay.
What about developing?
Developing, desarrollando. Estoy desarrollando algo.
You got it spot on.
Well, I've said it a lot, but I still have problems with it. What about distributors, to distribute in Spanish?
Yeah, Craig chose this word and I thought, oh, is that so hard? And then I tried to say it and realized, yeah, it's very hard. Let's give it a go. Distribuidores.
Oui, very good.
Oh, but it's hard. It's really hard, that one.
I'm not even going to try. And I'm not going to try the next one. I know the next one you are perfect at because you've had a lot of practice. What is it?
This one I know because it is, or it was, the longest word in Spanish. I don't know if it still holds that record. Otorrinolaringólogo. Otorrinolaringólogo.
And how would you say that in English?
Well, you could say, is it otolaryngologist?
That sounds good to me.
Yeah. Although I would normally just say ear, nose and throat specialist or ENT specialist.
Yeah, ear, nose and throat specialist I think is more common. The gender of some irregular nouns also cause problems. Now, one of the first things that learners of Spanish are taught is that if it ends in an O, if the noun ends in an O, it's masculine. If it ends in an A, it's feminine. Easy enough. Of course, in English, we don't have gendered nouns. A table is a table. It doesn't have a male or female gender. But in Spanish, it does. So, la mesa, for example. But there are exceptions that are confusing. What are some of the exceptions?
Yes, and of course, we guiris get it wrong time and time again.
Always.
Hand, la mano.
Yeah.
You'll often hear a gringo say el mano, I suppose, but it's la mano, as you know.
El problema or el tema.
Very important one for all you listeners and for us. El idioma.
And also el agua, water. So agua is masculine. And la foto is feminine.
Although photo makes sense if you think about it.
Fotografía.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it does end in A, but that's the short form. So I get that one. Agua causes me a lot of problems because you know what it is? El agua. Agua is feminine.
Really?
Yep. It is feminine, but apparently there's a rule that because it begins with A, for some words, to say la agua, it just doesn't sound very good.
Right.
So you put L. So here's the thing. How do you say then in Spanish, cold water?
El agua fría.
Yeah, exactly. You see. So when you put the adjective, in Spanish, it's got to agree with the noun, masculine or feminine. Agua, and it's fría. If it were masculine, it would be agua frío, which I've said many times, but it isn't. It's el agua fría because the adjectives agreeing with the noun. Another thing we don't have to do.
Yeah.
I still get that wrong. I quite often say, blah, blah, blah. Sí, y es una mujer muy avanzado. And I forget the simple rule that it's avanzada. I forget a feminine because I think it's even worse if you're a male foreigner because you're so used to speaking in the masculine form and it's used more in general in Spanish that when you got to use the feminine form, you forget to make adjectives agree. Would you say that's true for you?
Yeah, definitely.
You know?
It's and we know you always complain about phrasal verbs and maybe other points of English grammar that are difficult. But hey, we've got some very difficult things to deal with Spanish too. And there are some nouns that don't end in A and don't end in O. And we have to kind of think, well, is this masculine? Is this feminine? Because there are some nouns in Spanish that do not end in A and do not end in O. And we have to learn these separately.
Yes, and it's very, very difficult because if it ends in O or A, masculine and feminine, apart from the irregularities, but there's no rule for the others. So I tell you what, I'm going to test Craig. I'm going to say a noun and I'll give him the meaning in English. Or no, maybe I won't. Let's see if he knows the meaning.
Just tell me the English word and see if I know the Spanish word.
That's what we'll do. Much better. But I want you to give me the article, el or la, to show that you know what gender it is, okay?
Okay, here we go. This is where I look absolutely stupid.
All right. So meat or flesh?
La carne.
Yes.
So there's no A at the end of carne, but it's feminine. La carne.
So the final letter of carne was E. Here's another noun ending in E in Spanish. Edge.
The edge of the table or the edge of the chair.
Yep.
El borde.
Exactly. So carne ends in E. Borde ends in E. There's no rule. It's la carne, but it's el borde. You see our problem? You've got no rules except for O and A, so you know it or you don't. Here's another one. The Spanish word which could be fountain or source, spring, something like that.
La fuente. La fuente. I knew that one.
You know that. You knew it was la.
Yeah.
See, that's one I often get wrong. I knew la carne and el borde, but for some reason I often get fuente wrong. Curious. We have different mistakes.
La fuente del Nilo.
But how do you remember it's la rather than el?
Probably because I've been there.
Okay.
So when I was there, I was on a Spanish tour with a Spanish tour guide and a Spanish group of people, and we were constantly speaking about vamos a ver la fuente del Nilo, la fuente de eso, eso tal. The way I learn is not really by studying on a page of tables. I learn through listening and having an audio picture of the collocations of the words. So I can kind of, if I hear it enough and with repetition, I just remember those two words together, la fuente.
Let's test a couple more. What's the Spanish word for tablecloth?
Well, it's mantel and it's masculine, so el mantel.
You're right. The Spanish word for prison or jail?
It's similar to mantel, it's cárcel. But I have a feeling it's feminine, so is it la cárcel?
You're right. So el mantel, la cárcel. Both ending in EL, one masculine, one feminine. Okay, the Spanish word, for carnival.
Carnival. Well, it's very, very similar. Carnaval. El carnaval.
Masculine, yeah. By the way, a slight spelling difference. In English, it's CARNIVAL, but in Spanish, it's CARNAVAL. Here's a tricky one I always get wrong. Postcard.
Oh, yes, I get this one wrong too. Yeah, I often say el postal, but I think it's a la postal.
It is la, it's feminine. Two more for you. I'm going to basically tell you the answer, but not the gender. The Spanish word crisis and the Spanish word iris are written exactly the same in English. Mm-hmm. So what are those in English?
Well, I know a crisis, like because we speak about the economic crisis, it's la crisis.
It is.
It's la crisis económica.
Uh-huh. And iris?
And iris, because you've put them together, I don't know, but I'm guessing it's masculine because you've compared them. So I bet it's the opposite. I bet it's el iris.
Yeah. So in English, iris, and crisis, Feminine, la crisis. Masculine, el iris. Now, how are we giddies going to know that? You either know it or you don't.
Yeah.
I had to check them before I wrote it in the notes. Craig, don't think that I knew all of those. No. I had to check because there's no rule. It's just difficult.
But I suppose the good news for us, in a similar way that the good news for you with prepositions, if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. People will understand you. Obviously, it's better to know the correct preposition, and for us, the correct gender, masculine, feminine. But if you make a mistake, you can still communicate, you can still get the message across. It's not the end of the world. People will understand you.
Craig, there's another thing confuses me about Spanish, and I imagine you and all English speakers, whenever they don't use subjects with verbs.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big problem for us. For example, comió y se fue, pero los otros están aquí ahora. Which in English is she or he ate and left, but the other, men or women, we don't know, the other
Hold on.
Here now.
No, well, men or men and women.
Right.
It couldn't be only women because then it would be otras, but it could be a mixture of men and women.
So when you say los otros, you don't know if there are men there or there are women there or only men.
Well, if it's otros, they're not all women because then you would have to say otras.
Exactly.
But it could be a mixture of men and women.
And you just don't know.
And the thing is, imagine in real life, this could be really tricky. Imagine I'm talking about a group of us and there are 3 men and 5 women. And somehow Spanish people just seem to understand. I say, what about Sarah? What about Sarah? Ah, sí, comió y se fue, pero los otros están aquí. Or I'm thinking, hold on, comió quién? I never know who you're talking about.
I often have to clarify. So I ask the question. So wait a minute. Who are we speaking about here? Who are you referring to? Yeah.
But
it's
Spanish
confusing.
people seem to instinctively know. They just know who they're talking about. Even though it's not 100% clear, they intuitively, they know who you're talking about, although the subject isn't mentioned. You just know it. But we don't.
And one thing that I noticed, and I don't know if this bothers any female listeners, but it's quite a sexist thing inside the language to assume that if there's a group of people and some are men and some are women, you automatically take the male gender. Why? Why wouldn't you take the female gender? Is it just me who thinks it's a little sexist way to form a language?
Yeah, you're right. Have you heard, though, the latest PC, politically correct thing that they've started to do in Spanish? They say, bienvenidos o bienvenidas, amigos y amigas. So they've started saying both, say,
Good.
Queridos amigos y amigas. Some people have started mentioning both now.
Which we've been doing in English for a long time. Yeah. You know, he or she would like to... So you make sure you mention both genders.
Craig, can you think of any false friends that get you in Spanish? Now, what's a false friend? We're not talking about a person.
It's not you, Reza, because you're a good friend.
I'm a good friend. I'm a true friend.
You're a true friend.
I like to think. So a false friend is something that tricks you. It's a word which you think, oh, it's very similar to my language, so it's going to be the same. For example, I hear the word embarazada. I think, oh, that must mean embarrassed. It doesn't mean embarrassed. What is embarazada?
It's pregnant.
Right.
Yeah, if you're pregnant, embarazada. Another false friend is to have a cold. When you're sneezing, you have a head cold, you maybe a cough, you feel bad. Constipado. What does that remind you of in English, constipado?
Yes, we would think of constipated, which means you cannot go to the toilet.
So you're still blocked. There's a blockage, but it's the other side of the body, the other, not your head, it's your bum that's blocked.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there. And Craig, if I say to you, tengo frío, what's that in English?
I am cold. So it's a stative verb in English, to be cold.
Not I have a cold. Yeah, that would be constipado, yeah. So.
And if I said to you, tengo un amigo que es bombero, do you think he's a terrorist?
No, I used to think, oh, he's a bomber. But now I know he's a firefighter.
A firefighter.
Yeah.
A classic confusion is sensitive and sensible in Spanish. So sensible is sensato and sensitive, sensible.
Disgusto, you would think, oh, that's disgust.
It sounds disgusting to me.
But it isn't. Do you know what it is? Disgusto?
Is it when there's an irritation or you're worried about something? How would you put it into context? Que disgusto.
He perdido el tren. Ahora no sé si voy a llegar a tiempo. Que disgusto. And I've missed my train. Now I'm not sure if I'm going to arrive in time. That's un disgusto. That's a problem. That's an irritation that worries me.
So it's still a negative thing, but you're concerned, you're worried, you're irritated, you're not disgusted.
Yeah, disgust is like, oh, this food tastes revolting. It's going to make me vomit. That's disgusting in English.
Another problem is actual, because the translation in English would be current or present, and it's not actual. It looks like actual, but it's not, has a slightly different meaning.
Another classic is asistir, not assist. What is it in English, Craig?
Attend. We would attend a meeting, for example, to go to a meeting, to attend a meeting. Asistir, although it looks like assist, which would mean to help in English.
And if you're having an argument in English, what's that in Spanish?
Discusión, which looks like discussion, but it's más fuerte. If you're arguing, then you're really maybe raising your voice, you're shouting, you're annoyed, you're angry. It's a lot more verbally violent than just discussing the weather, for example.
Pretender is another one which causes problems. Pretendo hacer eso. I attempt to do this. Not I pretend. I pretend would be fingir, meaning it's not real, but pretender is to try or attempt.
So if I hear somebody say to me in Spanish, pero ¿qué pretendes? That would be, what are you trying to do?
Exactly. Yeah. What are you up to? What are you trying to do?
What are you up to? That's a good phrasal verb. What are you up to? What are you trying to do?
Suceso looks a bit like success, but it isn't. What is suceso, Craig?
An event.
And if an event happens or occurs, what's the verb?
In Spanish, suceder. Sucede.
Yeah. So don't confuse it with success in English, which is éxito. And tener éxito is to succeed in English. SUCCEED.
If at first you don't succeed,
try again.
Yep, I like that proverb. So those are a few of the more difficult false friends that we deal with as Spanish learners. Also, for me, especially in the beginning, the first year or two, when I was learning Spanish, the speed of the language. It was really difficult for me in the beginning to kind of catch the music, to go into the language, to understand the odd word. The odd word means the occasional word that's said, and it sounded really, really fast for me, which is probably true for anyone learning a new language. But I actually read that Japanese and Spanish have the greatest number of syllables per second. So you're hearing a lot of syllables in a short space of time, which is one reason it sounds so fast for us. So maybe as an English learner, you're frustrated with the weak forms that you hear in English, the linking words, the linking sounds that we've spoken about many times. But for us, it's the speed of Spanish when we first start to learn it that's difficult. Was that a problem for you in the beginning?
It was, yeah, and it still can be sometimes. Some people speak very fast, and since Spanish is already fast, as you say, with an extra fast speaker, very hard to follow them indeed.
Yeah. And also another problem for me is when there are too many people speaking Spanish at the same time, because we've mentioned this before on the podcast. Sometimes if you're in a group of people around a table in a restaurant, there's background noise, there's lots of noise in the place, and in Spanish, people tend to speak over one another at times, which means you might have 2 or 3 people speaking at the same time, and you have to really filter out the noise and focus in on what one person is saying to understand it. And that's always been a problem for me.
Another thing that I find tricky, maybe it's a cultural thing, apart from a language thing, is usted or tú? Oh, which one should I use? I think it comes much more naturally to native Spanish speakers. But for me, I've really got to think like, now, do I want to be polite? Yes. But if I say usted, it doesn't sound so friendly. Maybe I want to be polite, but in a friendly way. Also, tú is friendlier, but tú's not as polite. And sometimes I find it tricky to decide. What about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. But my system, my solution for that is to nearly always use the tú form, because sometimes it's difficult for me to remember to conjugate the verb with the usted form because it's different. And I think we're very lucky living in Spain because, as Elena said in the podcast on Colombia, lots of people in Central and South America use usted a lot more than native Spanish speakers in Spain. So it's kind of easier for us. And although I write emails and use usted, if I don't know the person, when I'm speaking, very, very rarely I use usted. And most people don't seem to get offended. So that's the way I deal with it. So I've found a way kind of around that.
Craig, what do you remember about when you first started speaking Spanish? How did you overcome your shyness or your embarrassment, not his pregnancy, his embarrassment at not speaking so well? How did you overcome it?
It was difficult. When I started learning Spanish, I did find it difficult to find people to talk to. But thinking back to when I first came to Spain, I did what Angelica suggested when we interviewed her for the Colombia episode. I found one or two people who I worked with, Spanish people, who I felt very comfortable speaking to. And I focused on them and I tried to have basic conversations with them. If you notice people are patient with you and they have time for you and they see you're trying to improve and trying to learn the language, then it's a lot easier to speak with someone you feel comfortable with. And then gradually I started speaking to more and more people. So if you're not living in a country where English is spoken, you can do this online through italki, for example, who sponsor this podcast, or by going to a meetup in your area of people who are doing a language exchange and try to find people you feel comfortable speaking to.
So is that what you do to keep up your level of Spanish these days? Do you still go to language exchanges and that type of thing?
No, it's a lot easier for us because we can find people, walk out the door and go and buy something in a shop and speak the language. But for people who are living in a Spanish-speaking country, they need to find groups of English people where they live locally or connect on the internet and have conversations through Skype.
What I do when I'm in Ireland or anywhere in the summer, when I'm out of this Spanish-speaking environment, sometimes I'm 2 or 3 months away and hardly anyone, if maybe no one speaking Spanish, I go out of my way to look at things on internet in Spanish.
What does go out of your way mean?
I make a special effort. So even though it's not necessary, I'll read world news stories, but in Spanish, just to keep myself up to date. So I go looking for it. Otherwise, you do go rusty, oxidado. You really do. It's very important to practice every week.
Exactly. That's very good advice. And what's your preference, Latin American Spanish or European Spanish? What did you begin learning?
Aesthetically, in terms of attractiveness, I like them both. I find European Spanish easier just because that's what I really know. I came to live in Spain. I haven't been in Latin America very much, although I have met people from Latin America. And it's always nice speaking to them. It's nice to hear the different accent. But I simply find European Spanish easier. Doesn't mean I find it nicer. No, I find it easier. In fact, I'm a real sucker. To be a sucker means you're really fond of something. I'm a real sucker for a really exaggerated Buenos Aires accent. Even though I can hardly understand it, I really like it. I just find it really, really nice.
Me too. I like the music of South American Spanish. I think because my first Spanish teacher was from Argentina.
Ah, right.
I had Spanish classes before I came to Spain. So my first teacher exposed me to Central American and South American culture more than European Spanish culture. And then I came here, so I learned European Spanish.
I lived for a couple of years in a place which is very good and famous for practicing your Spanish in Salamanca, in Castilla y León. Salamanca is an exception in Spain. It's one of the few places where there are more academies to learn Spanish than English. There are many. Yes, there are. Perhaps
Well, it's a university town, isn't it?
Exactly. Perhaps Granada is another one. Those two places, for some reason, Salamanca and Granada, a lot of foreigners go there to improve. Well, for some reason, because they're beautiful places. That's the reason. And there's lots of students, so you can have a good time. So young people go there to improve their Spanish. And the great thing about Salamanca, above all, is that the Spanish they speak there is considered a very pure Spanish, very close, if not exactly what's in the dictionary, according to the Real Academia de la Lengua Española. So in Salamanca, people speak the equivalent of our Oxford English. And it's no coincidence that Salamanca is the oldest university in Spain.
Yeah.
Just like Oxford and Cambridge are the oldest in the UK, and we take them as our reference for the language. Salamanca, they speak a very pure Spanish.
It's got a long tradition.
Yeah. So I was lucky there to hear people speak the way it's written in the book, although nobody else says. Let me give you an example. Everyone in Valencia says the important word paella. Very important word in Valencia, right? They don't say it like that in Salamanca.
How do they say it? Like the English, paella?
Not quite, but nearly getting that way. They say paella. Can you hear the double L is ever so slightly different?
Paella.
Paella. They almost make it a bit more like a single L, but not quite. It's somewhere. It's not single. It's not. Yeah. It's somewhere in the middle. It's paella, and that's the way they say it in Salamanca, and that's the way you're supposed to say it according to the dictionary. But hardly anybody does. But they do in Salamanca. Curiously. So
Interesting.
It's a good place to practice your pure Castellano Spanish if that's what you want to do.
Well, we hope this episode has helped you sympathize a little with us and also focus more on how you're going to progress with your English in the future and what you're going to focus on. We would love to hear what's the most difficult thing for you at the moment about learning English. We would love to hear your voice, where you're from, your name, and what you find difficult about English. Send your voice messages via our SpeakPipe service. Link in the website at inglespodcast.com/295, or go straight to SpeakPipe at speakpipe.com/inglespodcast. Reza, what are our email addresses?
If you want to write to us, write to craig@inglespodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
You're welcome to visit the Mansion Inglés online store, which you can find at store.mansioningles.net.
As always, we'd like to thank all our sponsors of the podcast who sponsor us via Patreon. And if you're interested, have a look at Patreon. That's patreon.com/English We'd like to thank all of you who've already joined, but we don't have time. So we're just going to thank our most recent Patreon sponsors. Thanks to Norman Foster. Oh, Norman. Maybe I should say Norman. I don't know why I made it Spanish. Norman Foster. Richard Calavia. Josue FZ. Nacho and Carlos Davila. They're our most recent sponsors, but thanks to all our sponsors.
Yes, thank you very much. You can see a list of all our sponsors on the Patreon website at patreon.com/inglespodcast. And you can join our Patreon program for as little as $1 per month. That's the minimum. You get instant access to recent transcriptions. I say recent, not so recent, and we do apologize for that. And one or two of our Patreon supporters have kindly let me know that it's getting a bit behind. However, we've been working really hard in the last 2 or 3 weeks and during the new year to get up to date. And I don't want to send all of the transcriptions and block your inboxes. So every 2 or 3 days, I'll send another one and we will very quickly get up to date with current podcasts. So thank you very much for your patience.
Craig, what have we got on next week's episode?
Next week, we'll be speaking about board games. That's B-O-A-R-D, not aburrido, but board games, games that you play on the table games. So I'm looking forward to that episode. Thank you very much for listening this week. Until next time, it's goodbye from Reza.
And bye-bye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.